Organisms and their environment. In this chapter, you will learn to explain how energy is transferred through food webs and back to the environment, practice using pyramids of numbers and biomass, describe nutrient cycles in ecosystems, use graphs and diagrams to describe and explain population growth. Explain why pyramids of energy or biomass provide more useful information than pyramids of number. Table of contents: energy flow and food webs, nutrient cycles, populations. Energy flow and food webs. The study of the interaction between living organisms and their environment is called ecology, and the area where an organism lives is called its habitat. A population is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same area at the same time. A community is all of the organisms of all different species living in the same habitat. An ecosystem consists of interactions between organisms in a community and their environment. The way in which an organism lives its life in an ecosystem is called a niche. All living organisms require energy to function. Energy in an ecosystem comes from the sun and is captured by plants through photosynthesis. Food chains demonstrate the transfer of energy from one organism to another. Many food chains link to form a good food web. Producers produce the energy-containing organic nutrients that all of the other organisms in the food chain need. Animals are consumers. An animal that gets its energy by eating plants is a primary consumer or herbivore. An animal which eats an animal is a secondary consumer or a carnivore. An animal that eats a secondary consumer is a tertiary consumer. Decomposers, such as fungi, are also consumers. They get their energy by feeding on dead and decaying bodies and waste organic material from plants and animals. As energy is passed along a food chain, some of it is lost in its environment. When an organism uses glucose and other organic compounds for respiration, some of the energy is released from the glucose is lost as heat energy to the environment. When one organism eats another, it rarely eats absolutely all of it. When an animal eats another organism, enzymes in its digestive system break down most of the large nutrient molecules so that they can be absorbed. The further you go along a food chain, the less energy is available for each successive group of organisms. Trophic levels. If we count numbers of organisms at each different positions in a food chain, we usually find that there are more plants than animals and more herbivores than carnivores. We can show this by drawing a kind of graph called a pyramid of numbers. Each level in the pyramid is called a trophic level. Trophic means feeding. The pyramid shape in a food chain is due to the dwindling energy available as we move up the trophic levels. The picture shows a differently shaped pyramid of numbers. If you make the area of the blocks represent the mass of the organisms instead of their numbers, then it is called a pyramid of biomass. Much better than pyramids of number because they take up the size of each organism into account. They give us a much better idea of the quantity of energy at each level than a pyramid of numbers does. A pyramid of energy is a graph showing the relative quantity of the energy at each trophic level. The quantity of energy at each level is measured in kilojoules per square per meter per year. Collecting this data is challenging and time-consuming. It is rare to collect the data to draw a pyramid of energy since it's a complex and time-consuming process. Collecting the biomass or counting numbers is easier, hence we mostly use pyramids of biomass or numbers instead. Understanding energy transfer in the food chain can be useful in agriculture. Technically, it would be more energetically efficient for humans to consume grass directly rather than eating it to the cattle first. However, humans can't digest the cellulose in grass, so we can't utilize its energy. In contrast, cattle turn cellulose into energy in the form of protein and fat, which humans can digest. As we have seen, decomposers feed on organic waste materials from animals and plants and on their dead bodies. Many fungi and bacteria are decomposers. Decomposers are extremely important because they help release substances from dead organisms. The released substances then can be used by other living organisms. Two of these substances are carbon and nitrogen. Carbon is a very important component of living things because carbon atoms are part of the molecules of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Carbon present in the atmosphere is absorbed by plants or for photosynthesis. These plants are then consumed by animals and carbon gets bioaccumulated in their bodies. When the plant or animal dies, decomposers will feed on them. When the decomposers respire, they release carbon dioxide into the air again. Sometimes, dead bodies and waste materials are not broken down by decomposers. Over long periods of time, they are gradually changed into coal, oil, or natural gas. These are called fossil fuels, not because they contain fossils, but because they were formed millions of years ago from living organisms. When these fossil fuels are burned, the carbon in them combines with oxygen from the air in a process called combustion. The carbon and oxygen combine to form carbon dioxide, which is released into the air again. Living things need nitrogen to make proteins, also to make DNA. The air is about 70% nitrogen gas. Molecules of nitrogen gas, N2, are made of two nitrogen atoms joined together. These molecules are very inert, which means they will not readily react with other substances. They first must be changed into a more reactive form, such as ammonia or nitrates. Changing nitrogen gas into more reactive form is called nitrogen fixation. There are several ways that nitrogen fixation can happen. Lightning. Lightning makes some of the nitrogen gas in the air combine with oxygen, forming nitrogen oxides. They dissolve in the rain and are washed into the soil where they form nitrates. Artificial fertilizers. Nitrogen and hydrogen can be made to react in an industrial chemical process, forming ammonia. The ammonia is used to make ammonium compounds and nitrates, which can be sold as fertilizers. There are several ways that hydrogen fixation can happen. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The bacteria live in the soil or in root nodules, small swellings. On plants use nitrogen gas from the air spaces in the soil and combine it with other substances to make ammonium ions and other compounds. Once the nitrogen has been fixed, plants can use it to make amino acids, which can then be used to make proteins. When an animal or plant dies, bacteria and fungi decompose the body. The protein containing nitrogen is broken down to ammonium ions and then is released. Another group of bacteria, called nitrifying bacteria, turn these ions into nitrates, which can be used again. Changing ammonium ions to nitrates is called nitrification. Nitrogen is also returned to the soil when animals excrete nitrogenous waste material. A third party of bacteria complete the nitrogen cycle. They are called denitrifying bacteria because they undo the work done by nitrifying bacteria. Most populations tend to stay roughly the same size over the period of time. They may go up and down, fluctuate, but the average population will probably stay the same over a number of years. The population of a green fly in a garden, for example, can be much greater one year than the next, but their numbers will almost certainly be back to normal in a year or so. Over many years, the sizes of most populations tend to remain at around the same level. The size of a population depends on how many individuals leave the population and how many enter it. Individuals leave a population when they die or when they migrate to another population. Individuals enter a population when they are born or when they migrate into the population from elsewhere. If the birth rate is less than death rate, population will decrease. If the birth rate and death rate are equal, the population will stay the same size. Many experiments on population sizes have been done on organisms like bacteria and yeast because they reproduce quickly and are easier to grow. The number of yeast cells are counted every few hours. For the first 12 hours, the population grows only quite slowly. It is called the lag phase. But once they get going, growth is very rapid. It is called the log phase or exponential phase. As the population gets larger, the individual cells can no longer reproduce as fast, and they begin to die off more rapidly, so the population stops growing and levels off. It is called the stationary phase. Eventually, the death rate exceeds the birth rate. This is finally called the death phase. This curve is something called a sigmoid growth curve. Sigma is the old Greek letter S, so sigmoid means S-shaped. If a few individuals move into a new environment, then their population curve may be like the one for yeast cells in the flask. The population takes a while to settle in, then increases quickly, and then levels off. We have seen that in the log phase, organisms are reproducing at their maximum rate. There is nothing slowing down their rate of reproduction other than their own capacity to reproduce. But eventually, the environmental factor comes into play, which slows down the population growth. This is the limiting factor, the factor that limits the rate of population growth, even if everything else will allow it to increase it. This is usually very difficult to find out which environmental factors are controlling the size of a population. Almost always, many different factors will interact. The picture shown is an example of how the size of the population of a predator may be affected by its prey. The numbers caught probably will give a very good idea of the population sizes. Whenever the snowshoe hare population rises, the lynx population also rises shortly afterwards, as the lynxes now have more food. The numbers tend to go up and down or oscillate, but the average population sizes stay roughly the same over many years. It is much easier to just count the numbers of individuals in various age groups at one point in time, and to draw an age pyramid. The age area box represents the number of individuals in that age group. Picture 1 is a bottom-heavy pyramid. There are far more young individuals than old ones. This indicates the birth rate is greater than the death rate, so this population is increasing. Picture 2 shows us a more even spread of ages. Birth rate and death rate are probably about the same. This population will remain about the same size. The picture shows how the human population of the world has changed around 4000 BC. For most of that time, human populations have been kept in check by a combination of disease, famine, and war. The main reason for this recent growth of birth is the reduction of disease. Improvements in overall hygiene has almost wiped out many diseases such as typhoid and dysentery in countries such as the USA and most European countries. Immunization and discovery of antibiotics have made it possible to treat most diseases caused by bacteria. Secondly, there has been an increase in food supply. Moreover, agriculture has been more efficient so that many parts of the world, each hectare of land is now producing more food than ever before. Thank you for listening.